Okay, we begin with the artist who was born yesterday, actually. If I'm not wrong, today is on the 4th. But anyway, Donald Judd, a very interesting minimalist artist who also had an interest in architecture, at least to an extent. And he died at 66, having a lot of success himself. This was the man, as a young man, he doesn't truly look like an artist. If by an artist we mean someone who is, you know, has splashes of color on the clothing and maybe wild hair and so on. He looks quite, you know, decent, so to speak, like a regular guy. But he was an artist and quite rebellious in his own way. Although he worked in a very strict way, he's one of the kings of minimalism in art. Yeah, so he doesn't look like the typical artist, but he was. So Donald Clarence Judd, so born, yes, on June 3rd, 1928, and he died in February 1994, was an American artist associated with minimalism, a term he nonetheless stridently disavowed. And I'm glad he did. And I think the best artists, they disavow categorization. I don't know of any artist who, you know, important artists who would like to be pinned down to a certain, you know, little box. No. The important artists think that their work is, and it's the same with architects. They don't like to be pinned down. Their quest transcends the limitations of a category or a little box. In his work, Judd sought autonomy and clarity for the constructed object and the space created by it, ultimately achieving a rigorously democratic presentation without compositional hierarchy. You'll see now several pictures of him with some of his works. For those who are not familiar with minimalist art, there might be a shock because certain artworks by him approach the status of non-art in a certain way. If by art we have certain preconceptions. But by now we are all kind of familiar with the extravagances of modern art or contemporary art. He was a very serious man and a very serious artist. And he also published theoretical texts. He was very articulate, a very interesting man. As I said, he had a lot of success, so much so that he obtained, I don't know, maybe he purchased a huge plot of land in Texas, and that's where he created some kind of a, I don't know how to call it. It's something in between art and architecture. We'll take a look at it. So to have such a big space in Manhattan, in New York City, you must do very well because the rents are astronomical in Manhattan. You know, I mean, just a little studio costs every month a few $1,000s. And, you know, if you have here, I see here, this is probably just his own exhibition space within the, within his own home. So obviously he was doing very well. Now, I don't know if this is his own house, but you know, I like to observe here, it might be his own house. I like to observe here a very old typewriter and a very old telephone, as you can see on the desk, which means that this, you know, thoroughly modern minimalist artist was also a nostalgic man. I also like these phones much more than the mobile phones. I hate the mobile phone. I really do. I don't like it at all. I also used to like old typewriters. Anyway, but you'll see that his artwork is very, very different from the phone you see here and from the typewriter. But we also see like old-fashioned, drafting tools, those that you are very familiar with, as students and as architects. And he was an interesting artist, I think he had a liking and an affection for the things well done. You'll see his pieces, which are extremely essentialized. They are exquisitely executed. And here he is in his older age. Okay, so here they are. Are they chairs? They are. There are 5 chairs. They might not be very comfortable, but it's something about his artworks that, although they are very simple, they transcend somehow time, and it's this ambiguity. Are they sculptures? Are they artworks? Are they furniture? You can use it as a furniture, but there is a but there. Maybe. Well, not only that they don't look very comfortable, but they might have a certain fragility. So in a way, they are chairs you are not supposed to sit on. This also, Donald Judd. Now, someone less familiar with minimalism in art would say, wait a minute, this is not art. But it is. It is art, and I think it's a joyous piece of art, if you have the space for it, of course. Essentially, what is here is something useless. It doesn't have a function. What is the function of art? The function of art is to be functionless in a way, like the tail of the peacock, as John Ruskin said, that is the most beautiful thing. And John Ruskin again said that the most beautiful things are actually the most useless. And that's why we need art, because art is opposing the worries of everyday life, is trying to transcend them. And this piece, you like it or not, is useless in the sense of not having a definite function, a prosaic function, but it is a construction, chromatically, engaging, that has aesthetical values, independently if we like it or not. All his work is like this, but what is very interesting, he achieved a lot of variety working with very simple, rectangular shapes, like this one. But look how, I would say almost beautifully this is done. These pieces are connected, both rigorously and capriciously. And so these connecting elements have an aesthetical role, not just, a functional role. He doesn't want to hide them. It's interesting, And you think maybe of the art of the paintings of Piet Mondrian, or in general of the Der Stil movement. Here was the announcement for an exhibition, Donald Judd, in the last year, from May 4th to May 29th. So exactly, well, almost exactly. It was in May, not in June. Anyway, he is very famous. And even myself, initially, I protested a little bit. I asked myself, is this art? It is. It is art, because it is, like Malevich, he painted, a black square. Here we have yellow squares, but with a 3-dimensionality, which distinguishes these squares from the square by Malevich. Look, he gets a certain level of variation using a box, a square box, and he just divides it in certain ways, and he uses a certain color, and he uses a certain material. You see the background within, I mean, inside the box. An article that I read yesterday about his work, we had these words of being a cold, the cold beauty of Donald Judd's sculptures. Here you see it is rigorously, very finely executed, and so it's a box, but it's done with that precision and that scrupulousness that art requires. But he, on the other hand, he's very close to design. Now you could approximate this artwork of becoming a cabinet, potentially. It could. So the frontier between uselessness and usefulness sometimes is thin. I didn't read his theoretical texts, but or I read something many years ago. He writes very well, and he was an intelligent man. These pieces were not done, you know, by someone unable to articulate thoughts. They are very well crafted. And in the joyous uselessness, they become art. Now you wonder, you know, I mean, look at this huge exhibition space, this gallery, maybe it's in a museum with these huge boxes. I mean, can you imagine how much effort was put into bringing this from who knows where? Maybe this is in Amsterdam. The man was in Texas to ship them, you know, and the insurance is immense for artworks. So, you know, yes, there is capitalism, and there is, you know, there are huge amounts of money involved here. I mean, maybe if you had to buy just one of these boxes, you know, it's possible. I don't know, but I imagine it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, if you can imagine. There is something revolting here, and I dislike this, but I cannot accuse the artist. The artist was part of the art world, and this is how the art world operates these days. What can you do? Some make it, some don't. You know, some would say this is not art. Others would say this is great. A collector, extravagant, with a lot of money would say, I'll buy all, I don't know how many are, 8 boxes. $5 million, no problems. Here is the money. So in a way, it's a sick world. I mean, really is, because art became an investment. Somebody told me it can be either an investment or an accessory. So these are the two limits. You either buy art in order to embellish a wall in your room, or you buy art for its investment, you know, potentiality. You buy it with $1 million, and then in 5 years, if things go as you imagine, it, you know, the value might increase to 1,300,000 or who knows what. It's sad, I think, but this is what capitalism does, measures everything into money and into numbers. And is very good at promoting whatever it wants to promote. Now, of course, if you like the flowers of Lukian, you wonder, you know, how could you conciliate between this and the flowers by Lukian? But I don't think they are incompatible. there are very different forms of aesthetics, it's true, but you know, this is what minimalist art is about. Here you can see that also he ventured into design. He designed, you know, chairs, explicitly chairs, although they are like the artworks we saw at the beginning, and a table. A table where you can actually use only on the long side, because from the other side. But an interesting idea to have shelves on both sides of the of, of the table. Here is the well executed, very well executed chair. It's a primal chair, if you want, an archetypal chair. These are prints, so, you know, the same spirit, the same aesthetics manifested in two dimensions, prints. And I think they are nice. I mean, you know, if you like this kind of art, but even this, you know, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not good at this, but if you are interested to purchase one of these prints, and it's a print, meaning it can be multiplied many times, it probably would cost a lot. Just this print, or this one, or that one. Anyway, the art market is crazy indeed. I mean, I saw in the Museum of Andy Warhol in Pittsburgh in the United States, his own museum, a piece that was essentially where it was a piece of metal on which at a party, Andy Warhol with his friends urinated on, and that was it. And the cost was hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was a piece of metal on which several people, 5, 6, 7 people did what they did. And that was the art. Actually, I mean, I'm not a cynic, but it looked interesting. But still, you know, when you think about it, what it was, you know, and you compare him with this with Michelangelo suspended from the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, and you know, painting himself, painting to his own death in a way. I mean, you know, you compare one with the other, you cannot compare them actually. But there are absurd things in the art world, and not just in the art world. I like this, you know, I mean, even as a picture, it looks nice. And you see here, he introduced an exception, an accident, so to speak. And it's nice, I think. And, you know, they are exquisitely executed, you know, from, I mean, that there was knowledge here, and refinement, and attention to detail. And now we move to Marfa in Texas, where he began to build, you know, under the sky, so to speak. Is this architecture? Well, you could actually sleep perhaps underneath one of these things and be protected from the sun, and maybe even from the rain to an extent, if it doesn't rain too hard. Architecture indeed has to do with function to an extent, although there are temples in the past, in the ancient world, which didn't have a pedestrian or prosaic function. In fact, in some of them, you couldn't even get in. There was this giant temple without an entrance. It didn't have an interior space. What about the Egyptian pyramids? Are they architecture? They are. Is there a tomb there inside? There is, but you know, it was blocked, it was hidden. It was, yes, the adventurers and the explorers, the specialists found their way, but it was not meant to enter a pyramid. And no one would say that the pyramid is not architecture. It is. Maybe, you know, the primordial architecture, the Ur architecture. So in that sense, these are in between sculpture and architecture. Brâncuș said that architecture is an inhabited sculpture. I'm not so sure about this. I think architecture has its specificity and it's not as simple, but I do believe that a sculptural quality in a building adds to that, something to that building. And usually sculptural buildings are more interesting and engaging. I actually think these look nice here in this landscape. You know, I don't know what they are, but they intrigue me. Yes, I would enjoy visiting them, even if they are, you know, concrete boxes. But look at the quality of the concrete. I imagine it's concrete. It's not wood, and maybe even Tadao Ando would have been jealous. Now, to do something like this, you imagine you must have the necessary money, the necessary means. You cannot build something like this. I mean, it costs just one of these boxes, open boxes, costs a lot. And, you know, he did it. And you will see, he covered the whole field with them. Donald Judd. And this is probably his own land, was in Texas, in Marfa. He also built a few so-called real buildings, like here. Unfortunately, I couldn't find another picture, better resolution. And you see, maybe this one existed before and he appropriated it. I don't know. But you will also see some interiors of the buildings he either built from zero or he, you know, refurbished and changed and so on. What if, you know, Levi-Sud said, maybe we should build our buildings first and then learn how to live in them. So imagine, you know, Donald Judd built these just as we see them here, and then we think of using them as possible architectures. Like here, for example, is like a room now opened on one side without a door and without a window. But you can appropriate it, you can use it, you can enter it and find refuge in it when the weather is difficult. So I think this kind of architecture where you build it before you think of a possible function, it's an interesting way to build. You know, you just build, you build a building, but without any function. You just build it. Of course, you have floors, walls, roofs, but no function. And after you build it, you invest a function or several functions into that structure. It works. And look at the you know, the vastness of what he did here. I mean, this is a large plot of land, and all of these are his works. Now, of course, they are different from what we see here. We see a church or whatever, and you know, houses. This is a different kind of construction, a different kind of architecture, but to an extent, they do deserve the word. They qualify to an extent, maybe no more than to an extent, to be called architecture. Now, I don't know if he also did this intentionally, so you have this dichotomy, this tension between, you know, the irregularity of this and the strictness of his you know, sculptures. I think they are nice, and they are nice also, you know, with the shadows they project. Now, of course, the one who took the picture chose a certain time of the day to, to have these shadows in this way. But all in all, sculptures or architectures or both, well, both sculpture and architecture in the end are about beauty. If architecture is deprived of beauty, I don't think it qualifies to be called architecture. It is a building, it can be used, but if it has no beauty, if it doesn't stir up our imagination, if it doesn't warm up our heart, it doesn't deserve the name architecture. Now we see a so-called real building. I imagine he built it, all of it, and for himself. And look at images from the inside. Interesting, these giant windows. We are going to see in the case of Raphael Vigneoli also giant square windows, but which do not open. These open. And I like the fact that they become also doors. You know, you open the window and then you can also exit and enter the room, the space. And I like the interiors. They are abstract. Maybe some I think are a little bit cold. They are both physical and metaphysical. And I think they are refined. I mean, it's a refined interior design. It's a refined architecture. Look at the lamp, look at the sofa, look at the armchair, and you can tell here is a man of taste. You'd almost say an Italian designer. Well, he was not Italian, but everything is coordinated, even the colors, you know, and the idea to enter the room directly from the outside through the window, because the window, you see, the artist invented something that we as architects forgot. You know, we are so, we automatically, for a room, create a door. But this one doesn't have a door. It has a window, a giant window, which functions as a door too. And I think it does the job beautifully. Look at this. It's nothing wrong with this. Now, if you do something like this in the studio and you'll say, well, professor, I give the entrance into the building through the windows, which are giant, and it's just a threshold which is not too tall. And I saw this being done by an artist in the United States, Judd, and I liked it. I'm sure the reception of the idea would not be great, because we are conditioned to think in very strict, predictable ways. But the truth of the matter is it works. And this is an exhibition for a foundation, I think, in Europe. Well, he didn't do the buildings. He just did these boxes, you know, these translucent boxes, which you might not say they are sculptures, but they are. In essence, art is about transcending the, you know, the everyday expectations or experience, and they do function in this sense, you know, exactly because they escape, you know, the predictability of a prosaic function. And some sketches by him, this from 1983. In his own way, he was also searching for the immeasurable, or for the infinite, or for the absolute. Because in the abstractness and the perfect craftsmanship of the object, of the sculptural object, what else are we to see? Now we arrive at the second person, if I am to call him so, who was born actually today in 1892, a little bit younger than Le Corbusier. They were friends. And I have here not part of the PowerPoint presentation, but I have, I could open a website where I can read a letter by Le Corbusier to him. Ginzburg invented, under the impulse of an acquaintance, an interesting word, disurbanism, D-I-S, urbanism, disurbanism. What could that mean? It means it's an urbanism which disintegrates itself. So it's going against urbanism. And Le Corbusier wrote to him to defend urbanism, because Ginzburg promoted, later in his life, promoted the idea of disurbanism. So you see, he was born actually today, the 4th of June. Moise, I don't know how to pronounce his first name, Ginzburg, was a Soviet constructivist architect, best known for his 1929 Narkomfin building in Moscow, and we are going to see that building. He was the son of an architect. He was trained, after high school, he went to Paris, but he didn't stay there for long. Then he went to Milan, and in Milan he studied architecture, and then he returned to, to Moscow, I think. This was the man, and a very important presence in constructivism, in Russian constructivism. And Russian constructivism continues to inspire today, and it even inspires Zaha Hadid through Malevich, who was a constructivist artist himself, and he created what was called suprematism. But Ginzburg was an architect, as opposed to Malevich. Malevich didn't study architecture. Ginzburg did, and there were other important Russian or Soviet, how to call them. They were both architects and artists. We are going to see a picture with many of them. He looks like a serious man, and he was, here he is, you see the finger pointing towards him, and there were other important architects and artists here in this group. They represented an avant-garde, and they were very inspired by the Soviet, by the revolution. They wanted to create for a new man. This is something that is missing today. We invent all kinds of fashions, but we don't have that social ferment that they had at the beginning of the 20th century. So Ginzburg was born in Minsk into a Jewish architect's family. He graduated from Milano Academy in 1914 and Riga Polytechnical Institute in 1917. During the Russian Civil War, he lived in Crimea, relocating to Moscow in 1921. There, he joined the faculty of, impossible to read that word, and the Institute of Civil Engineers, which eventually merged with Moscow State Technical University. I have to tell you, we have usually a bit of a tensioned relationship with our neighbors, but the truth is a very complex culture, and even now they have an unbelievably forward-looking architecture school in Moscow, Strelka. Where they invite, there are people who go there, a few times a year, like Rem Koolhaas and Winnie Maas, and it's a very forward-looking school. So there is a tradition of the new in Russia. very much so. And the avant-garde of the beginning of the 20th century continues to inspire. And that's why we talk today about Ginzburg. He was the ideologist of constructivism. Maybe he was not the only one, but I found this wording about him. So the founder of the OSA group, Organization of Contemporary Architects, which had links with Vladimir Mayakovsky, the great poet, and Ossi Brick's Left group, he published the book Style and Epoch in 1924. So he was the founder of that group, OSA group. And I suggest to Romanians to organize themselves also. If you have something to say, and if you love architecture and you love art, think very much courageously and associate yourselves with other people, create groups, do exhibitions, write papers. You can manifest your creativity in many ways. Don't let your idealism sleep or be hidden. No. So he published this book, Style and Epoch, in 1924, an influential work of architectural theory with similarities to Le Corbusier's Version Architecture. It was effectively the manifesto of constructivist architecture, a style which combined an interest in advanced technology and engineering with socialist ideals. The OSA experimented with forms. Now, between OSA and OMA, which is the architecture practice of Rem Koolhaas, is just a difference of one letter. I don't think Rem Koolhaas ignores the avant-garde movements at the beginning of the 20th century at all. Maybe he was even inspired by this OSA. It's possible. So experimented with forms of communal apartments to provide for the new communist way of life. Its magazine, SA, a contemporary architecture, featured discussions of city planning and communal living, as well as the futuristic projects of Ivan Leonidov. The group was dissolved in the early 1930s into an all-union association of architects, along with the competing modernist group Asnova, led by Nikolai Ladovsky, and the proto-Stalinist Vopra. Now, this is his most important work, an apartment building that apparently influenced Le Corbusier when he did his L'Unité d'Habitation in Marseille, Narcomfin. And this text by Charlie Clement is interesting. It's called Narcomfin and the Social Condenser. Now, derelict, well, actually, it was refurbished, but just last year, Moscow's Narcomfin building was once a potent expression of the social condenser, an approach to building which sought to engineer a new, more socialist community. This was before it was refurbished. I understood it was refurbished. Just in 2019, it was not yet refurbished, but because it was placed on the list of UNESCO's most endangered buildings, I think the Russians decided to take care of it. And if they did, good to them. And I think they did because I found some pictures. I believe that's what happened. So let me read a little bit because there are interesting ideas relating to this building. The social condenser remains one of architecture's purest experiments in social engineering. Emerging from the revolutionary ferment that followed the First World War, its essential purpose was to break down social hierarchies and bolster a new working class consciousness in its residents. Probably the most well-known example is the Narcomfin building from 1932, a block of flats located at 25 Novinsky Boulevard in Moscow, designed by Moisés Ginzburg and intended for high-ranking members of the Commissariat of Finance, shortened to Narcomfin. The building's most striking feature is that none of its 54 housing units had a dedicated kitchen. Now let's stop a little bit here, because we take it as an absolute obligation to equip every apartment with a kitchen, big or small. But the truth of the matter is, and I lived myself through such an experience, 3 years in a row, I went with students to Vienna, the capital of Austria, and there in the Erasmus house, we had our rooms quite comfortable with private bathrooms, but the kitchen was communal. On each floor, there was a kitchen. And I think it was very nice. And, and the Russians then, or the Soviets, experimented with this idea, because in conditions of approximate civility, it's very nice actually to meet in a large space. Of course, that communal kitchen would be bigger. It's a communal space. And, interact with neighbors, maybe even taste a little bit of what the neighbor cooked and vice versa. The neighbor would return the favor, so to speak. It's about interaction. It's about dialogue. I mean, truly, are our secluded apartments, each one with its private kitchen, such a great, progressive step forward? I don't even know who my neighbors are. I am secluded in my apartment and I cook in my miserable solitude, and maybe another neighbor cooks in his or her miserable solitude. So these Russians experimented with something which I personally think has a potential even for the present. So I continue to read. Instead, the building was built with communal kitchen, laundry and creche facilities, a move which was intended to socialize the kind of reproductive labor that was traditionally carried out by women in the home. Meanwhile, in a bid to stimulate an ethos of self-improvement and the new, more socially engaged lifestyle, the building also featured a library and a gymnasium. Now let's think about this. Are we making apartment buildings today with such a richness of functions? And if not, why not? Why not create an apartment building with a library and a gymnasium and a creche and yes, even a communal kitchen or even a communal bathroom? You could still have, if you want, private bathrooms and private kitchens, but you could also have a communal one, which could add something to the socializing that is important for human beings. So this is the building, which Le Corbusier liked very much, because I read in his archive there were the drawings, the plans of this building in Le Corbusier's archive. And the experts think that it influenced L'unité d'habitation by Le Corbusier. So the Narkomfin building echoed similar experiments happening at the same time in other cities led by socialist administrations. In Vienna, for instance, the interwar period saw a tenth of the city rehoused in so-called Gemeindebauten, sorry for my German, housing which aimed to transform the city's working class through embedded social and cultural institutions. Indeed, Vienna has, there is the phenomenon called Red Vienna, which was the communist Vienna, if you believe it or not. And actually a very complex and I would say inspiring urban experiment and phenomenon. So in a place like Rabenhof, located on Vienna's so-called Ringstrasse, there's proletariats. So the Ringstrasse of the proletarians, residents had access to a theater, which transformed later into a cinema, along with a kindergarten, 2 playgrounds, and communal kitchen and laundry facilities. Nice. Evidently, the social condenser enjoyed quite a moment in this period, but it also endured in the Soviet space long after, albeit in a somewhat less radical form, especially after the Soviet Union took a more socially conservative turn under Stalin. Indeed, while the attempts to liberate women from domestic labor were left out, the post-war period saw the construction of many interesting new residential and cultural buildings which sought to engineer an emboldened working class culture, particularly in the newly socialist societies of Eastern Europe. After the fall of communism, however, the social condenser's fundamental purpose quickly proved totally out of step in cities that rapidly adapted to a more capitalist model of urban development. If they can get away with it, developers operating in a capitalist urban development framework will always build buildings which make little affordance for the wider social functions which the social condenser offered. There is a criticism today because the speculative financial trappings of capitalism ignore important human functions which, strangely, for those who lived under the communists, were actually present at that time in those countries which were referred to as Eastern Europe. So the Narkomfin building today, in this context, it should come as no surprise that most residents vacated the Narkomfin building years ago, and the structure has fallen into a state of disrepair despite being listed as a cultural heritage monument on the Russian Cultural Heritage Register. Now the building has the dubious honor of sitting on top of another less illustrious list, UNESCO's endangered buildings, but it was restored, and good that it was. Interestingly, things have recently come full circle in contemporary architecture's fixation with densification and the so-called mixed-use development, which bears some striking similarities with a social condenser. The fundamental difference is the underlying social reality within which these respective design approaches operate within. Whereas the social condenser was envisioned as a space to realize a new, more emancipated working class subject, the modern day mixed use development is overwhelmingly targeted at boogie young urban professionals. In other words, the former is exclusive of bourgeois ideology and the latter is thoroughly steeped in it. And I think this is very important because it's true in the present there are so-called interests in the mixed use developments. But the ideology behind this is thoroughly bourgeois, capitalistic. It's not really about humanism. It's not really about the equality between man and woman. It's really about selling better. And it's a fundamental difference between, without idealizing what they did, but what they did in Russia at that time, in the Soviet Union. But the truth of the matter is, theoretically speaking, some of the ideals, if I am to call them so, of communism were not bad, theoretically speaking. Unfortunately, they were externalized or practiced or served not in very inspiring ways often, and there were abuses and so on. But theoretically, it's nothing wrong to have equality between all people. What do we have instead today? People immensely rich and then people immensely poor. But that's what, theoretically communists fought against. Unfortunately, there were discriminations and inequalities also in communism, but theoretically they were not supposed to be. The society was meant to consider all human beings equal, even if there are differences, of course, but it's abnormal to have, in fact, I read that, something like this, that the 1% richest people, like 64 richest people on earth, if I'm not mistaken, they have the same income, the same, the financial prowess is equal to that of the rest of the world. I mean, it's absurd, no? I mean, it's totally absurd. I mean, all people, normally work very hard. It's not just Bill Gates who works very hard. Now, how come that Bill Gates has, an unbelievable amount of billions of dollars, and so many people barely are able to pay their rent? But this is what capitalism is, and in capitalism, if you don't make a profit, you are on the right or wrong side of the fence. In a way. I mean, it's true. I have my own experience with capitalism. I think capitalism had great successes in order to fill our supermarkets and so on, but its excesses also ruin the climate, and is ruining the icebergs, is ruining the sea levels, and is ruining sustainability. Its excesses are unbelievable. And in fact, the presentation today will end with Rafael Vigneoli, who is illustrating these excesses quite well. So, I think we should reflect on Ginzburg, and we should reflect he built a few other buildings, not just houses, he built others. But I have actually a website. In fact, it's open now. I can read more, but I don't want to, maybe spend too much time, although maybe I should. I think it's important to question again certain premises of our lives. Like we saw that building by Donald Judd, where you entered from the outside directly through the window. Something which would appear to the conventional architect as being unacceptable and absurd. And it's neither absurd nor unacceptable, actually. Equally, an apartment building where you provide a communal kitchen, I don't think it's an absurdity or something unacceptable. No, I also don't think it's unacceptable to even have, bathroom facilities in the courtyard, like actually so many villages in Romania have. It's okay. I lived like this. My grandparents lived like this. It's very hygienical, actually, because the toilet is not inside the apartment, it's outside. And it was the big deal to actually go there, a few times a day. I don't think it is. So in Sweden, in Stockholm, which is a very sophisticated city and a very sophisticated country, as you know, and very well to do, I had the occasion to spend a day in a building which had communal bathroom. It was a very civilized building and a very civilized society. It works. When I went with students to Venice to see the biennial, we lived in a camping, and we had our tents, provided by the camping, and then the bathroom facilities were in a building which was from my tent at least at almost 100 meters away. It was okay. I would go there, take a shower, return to the tent. It's fine. Why don't we do this sort of thing again? Because it would reduce the obsession with the verticality of the pipes inside the buildings. It's much more expensive to provide each apartment with each own bathroom and each own kitchen than to create a communal cluster of showers and so on, and toilets somewhere, in the proximity maybe of the building, in a courtyard, or who knows. It can be experimented. It was done, and it worked. Anyway, but plus, I think the interaction between human beings is an important thing in life, to know your neighbors, to talk with them, yes, maybe you might not like always the smell of the food that a certain neighbor cooks. It's okay. It's okay. You learn to negotiate, to be less stringent and so on. So this is the building actually that Ginzburg designed without the refurbishment that came later. But here it is. It is nicely cleaned up, and I don't know. I actually like it more like this. maybe I have a morbid predisposition, but somehow it looks too clean here. I think it needs some graffitis from some rebellious artists. And here it is, you know, it's too white, it's too clean, it's too, I don't know. It's not for me, but I'm glad that the building stands. And I'm glad that, you know, some people took care of it. Um, so this is thus a social condenser. Interesting wording, no? Social condenser. So you think less about the, you know, the little privacy of a certain inhabitant. You think of that too, but you also think of the commonness, the togetherness, what unites people, not only what separates them. So yes, I do believe it's very possible that Le Corbusier found some inspiration in this building. Those who know very well the work of Ginzburg think so. And as I said, the plans, sections, the drawings of this building were found in the archive of Le Corbusier. He wrote, so he wrote this book in 1924, Style and Epoch. Now, maybe I should, because I did prepare, let me see, maybe I should show where is it? Just a second. I have the text. For example, this letter from Le Corbusier to Ginzburg from 1930. My dear Ginzburg, I am leaving Moscow. So this was written by Le Corbusier. I have been asked to write a report on the recent competition for the green town of Moscow. I haven't done so, not wanting to present a judgment on the work of colleagues. On the other hand, I answered the request that was made to me indirectly by giving the Committee for a Green Town some commentaries on the development of Moscow and the Green Town. My conclusions cannot agree with the enthusiasm that the simple word de-urbanization or disurbanism, which Ginzburg was advocating, seems to raise at the moment. There is a contradiction in the term itself. This word is a fundamental misunderstanding that has deceived many Western theoreticians and wasted a lot of the time of governing boards of industries. A fundamental misunderstanding that everything opposes and refutes. Society is complex, it is not simple. Whoever tries to bring hurried and tendentious solutions to its problems will meet opposition. It revenges itself, it falls into a state of crisis, and despite changes and regulations, it doesn't let itself be manipulated. It is life that decides. This is a theme with Le Corbusier. It is life that decides. It is always in the end life. Life has the last word, and I believe it's true. And it's easy to observe this in any park where the architect traces the path in a certain way, and then you see a diagonal somewhere through the grass because someone naturally felt that it's more convenient to walk on that way and not on the path designed by the architect. So last evening in the Kremlin, in the office of this Mr. Lejawa, the vice president of the USSR, as you can see, Le Corbusier was highly connected, connected at high levels there. One of the commissaries of the people had a thought of Lenin translated for me that, far from supporting the thesis of deurbanization, on the contrary, confirms the necessity of urban reform. Lenin said this: if one wants to save the peasant, one must take industry to the country. Lenin did not say if one wants to save the town dweller. One mustn't confound. There is all the difference. To take industry to the country, that is to say, industrialize the country, that is to create places of human concentration with machines at their disposal. Now, here was Le Corbusier at that time advocating urbanization, advocating bringing the machine into the village, and so on. We can debate this because that machine brought to the village is also a participant in the assault on the climate and on nature and on the ozone, which we have less and less. Nature is good for the city dweller whose mind has been galvanized by the city, who puts to work in the city the diligent mechanism of his mind. It is in the group, in shock and cooperation, struggle and mutual help, in activity that the mind ripens and brings forth fruits. Now, the paradox is that Le Corbusier in his later years retired himself to the village. I mean, that little hut he built for himself, the cabanon, far away from the city, is the proof. But architects, and not just architects, we contradict ourselves all the time. So I'm not going to read all of it because maybe, I mean, I don't know what to do. It's a long letter he wrote to his friend Ginzburg, but maybe I will just read the last few lines. In essence, he fights with his friend, defending urbanization, while Ginzburg at that time was interested in disurbanism, to de-urbanize. So the green town that the talk was about probably was an attempt to, move towards the village, towards the outside of the city. Le Corbusier disagreed with him, but this was a younger Le Corbusier, because the older Le Corbusier knew better. Built the hut for himself, a 16 square meters room, and I showed just the other day, or one of the former days, pictures with him in his office, 2 meters by 3 meters. So much for like, for example, he says, please then do not see a hostile attitude in my serene and firm affirmation. Mankind tends to urbanize. Come on, mankind tends to urbanize, but then what did you do at the edge of the Mediterranean Sea all alone in a 16 square meters room? He even died there. So he ends the letter to Ginzburg, Le Corbusier. Appreciate this characteristic detail yourself. One of the projects of de-urbanization proposes, among other things, to build straw huts in the forest of the green town. Bravo, magnificent, as long as they are only for weekends. But do not say that having built huts in straw, you can then tear down Moscow. I appreciate his sense of humor, but the truth of the matter is Le Corbusier himself retired to the Le Cabanon, which was a hut, through and through, and not just for the weekends, for months, full months. So there is here another material about Ginzburg, just quickly to show it to you. Just a second. I don't know what's going on here. I'm supposed to see it. It's here. Well, just quickly, maybe in order to learn a little more about this Russian or Soviet architect. So he was the son of an architect, as you can see. This website is quite good, Misfits Architecture. And I like the word misfit. And I actually would like to see more misfits. I call them oi negre, because I think these misfits are actually pushing culture forward. They are the truly creative ones, the misfits. So Ginzburg was the son of an architect born in Minsk. Upon high school graduation, he departed for Paris, but soon moved to Milan in order to study architecture there. After graduation, he returned to Russia via Bulgaria at the outbreak of World War I, and continued his education at the Riga Polytechnic, which moved to Moscow. In this way, he supplemented his training in classical architecture with a sound knowledge of the technical disciplines. In 1917, carrying a diploma in architecture and engineering, Ginzburg departed for the Crimea, where he built his first house, studied the vernacular architecture, and supervised the lock. What is very interesting, and this I didn't mention, is that Ginzburg found similarities between vernacular architecture and industrial architecture. I move a little forward because it's a long text here too. Ginzburg disagreed with the futurists. The author of this article stated that for sure Ginzburg was aware of the futurist movement in Milan because he studied in Milan. But he disagreed with the futurists, total rejection of history because for him there were useful things to learn from it. After graduation in 1917, he learned some of the things in Crimea, where he studied the vernacular of Crimean native Tatar people and wrote a paper, Tatar Vernacular Architecture of Crimea. Interesting. And then I'm not going to read all of this because we are not working for a PhD in about Ginzburg, but in essence, he said that there was a connection between, no, maybe I should read this. His description of the spontaneous, impulsive character of Tatar folk architecture, rushing along a natural course, following its bends and irregularities, adding one motif to another with a picturesque spontaneity that consists a distinct creative order, anticipated the vivid language he was later employed. I mean, this text was not written by him, but by the translator of his book, Style and Epoch, into English. Anticipated the vivid language he was later to employ in Style and Epoch to convey the dynamism of the industrial plant. So interesting that he saw similarities between vernacular architecture and the industrial architecture. And he saw that actually two phenomenons contributed to the novelty of the Soviet society then. On one hand was the Russian Revolution, on the other hand was the Industrial Revolution. So this is a building he built, which is, the author of this writing says it's too early to call this building constructivist, but it does show a rigor of organization and construction. And the most important outcome was his book Style and Epoch from 1924. That was the first theoretical underpinning of constructivism in architecture. Here is a poster, already avant-garde, so to speak, and the Russians were very, very good at this. And he was not the only one. And anyway, I can send you, if you want, the link to this text. It's interesting, but it's a little bit too long to read it now, spontaneously or not. He was searching for new aesthetic ideals in accordance with the revolution, the social political revolution, and in accordance with assuming technology, meaning industry. So according to Ginzburg, the historical determinants of the new style, the factors unleashing the vital spark of creative energy, needed to impel the genetic cycle of stylistic change towards a new constructive stage and hence a new style, where the industrial and Russian revolutions, as I already mentioned. So because Ginzburg understood, and as any good architect or any artist understands, what is written on the facade of the secession building in Vienna, of the secessionist movement. To each time it's art, and to art it's freedom. We cannot use, different styles for the 21st century because we live in a different time. At the same time, art needs its freedom, and architecture needs its freedom too, to manifest its true spirit. Otherwise, it will collapse into a déjà vu, and we don't need that. Anyway, we saw this picture, and here there were various groups, like, for example, this group with Temas also gave birth to a rival group, Asnova, led by Nikolai Ladovsky, and that came to be known as the Rationalists. Oddly, the Rationalists were into so-called space and into so-called expression, and had deconstructionist tendencies before Derrida and Frank Gehry were even born. And here we see some drawings. But this was, you know, indeed, Derrida and Frank Gehry were not born. And the Russians were already experimenting with, you know, architectures that at times resembled what later was called deconstruction. Or look at this house. A proto-deconstructivist it may be, but it wasn't a useful housing idea for 1921 Russia. But you see, in a way, it's nothing new under the sun, you know. But this house, which would be alarmingly novel today, was imagined exactly 100 years ago, 1921. No, it was an incredible turmoil then in aesthetics, and not just in aesthetics in Russia. That's why they keep influencing us. And as I said, Malevich influenced Zaha Hadid, and Chernikov influenced Bernard Tschumi and others. These Russians were extremely intuitive about certain dimensions of what we call the future. And this preoccupation with apartment buildings, it was very, very intense. So anyway, he built a few other buildings, most of them, you know, in this not brilliant state, but, you know, like in 1930, he built 3 main buildings. And the article at Misfits, if you search Misfits architecture, Ginzburg, you are going to come across this, this site. I like this collective dimension, you know, this preoccupation with togetherness, with being, you know, together. And I think there is a potential here that we should explore again. I even found in connection with his name examples of Eastern European public housing from various countries, you know, and in New York City, after 1989, it was in 1990 something, there was an exhibition at Storefront for Art and Architecture in New York, which is, was and is kind of an avant-garde art and architecture gallery, an exhibition which was imported from France with cosmic communist construction and projects. Yes, with those very projects and buildings that we despise today. But in New York, they seem to be very appreciated and interesting and all the rest. Isn't life strange? Anyway, yes, and you see you know, the crystallization of space within the buildings is complex. So I would understand why Le Corbusier was seduced by this building and maybe a few other buildings built in that at that time in Soviet Union. And you see double height living rooms, just like at l'unité d'habitation, but these were done in Soviet Union. So, yes, there are all kinds of technicalities here. It's not now the time, perhaps, to go into detail, because we still have to arrive at Raphael Vignoli, who, in a way, moved in the opposite direction, and I hope to be able to evoke this. And interestingly, this was not a building built for, you know, some poor proletarians. No, it was built for the Ministry of Finance and like big officials, like this man who lived in this building. And it says here, Narkomfin is the poster building. It's also notable for the penthouse. Well, he had a penthouse, Nikolai Milutin, who as a commissar of finance was the building's client, sponsor, and the resident. So anyway, this is how the building looked, but it was refurbished, and he built another one. That one was in a better shape because it was not placed right in the center of Moscow. And here you see some pictures. And I actually went inside the L'Unité d'Habitation, but both in Marseille and in Berlin. And I see similarities, except that here the access is from an exterior corridor, not the so-called rue, the street that gives access to the apartments in L'Unité d'Habitation by Le Corbusier. So, Mr. Ginzburg, and here is an homage to him by the author of this article. Like, for example, he thanks Ginzburg for being the first person to observe that vernacular architecture and industrial architecture shared a clarity of thought and structure. Miss Fitz did too much later, for understanding apartment plans as having optimum proportions. For understanding the relationship between room proportions and plan efficiency, for understanding the link between apartment volume and building volume, for the type study work in general that attempted to provide people and families with housing with dignity. Anyway, but this watercolor somehow makes me think of the watercolors by Stephen Hall, for going ahead and doing it anyway with that RZSKT commune, these three buildings that he built, and you see some pictures here, which had the same kind of, architecture, for inventing apartments that are still lived in the way they were intended to be. And here is an image from an apartment that was done 100 years ago, and if it would be done today, we wouldn't consider it passé. So, and the homage goes on, for your faith in apartments with communal facilities as a good way for people to live, as we are currently discovering today. For having the foresight to see the reality of 1920s Russia and the courage to face it, for having the mind to comprehend what to do with it as an architect, for having a knack to put together a design team to go for the solutions, for having the skill to resolve it in a work of unquestionably timeless substantiality, for having the bravery to proudly present it under swelling storm clouds of history, for having it all documented and printed for us to discover it, for having the persistence to incarnate it in buildings that keep proudly propelling themselves through time, for imbuing them with a spirit that converted one of us to architecture, and amongst things resulted in this post. Whoever wrote this, I don't know the name, but it's a nice homage. And now we go to the third part and last part of this presentation, Mr. Vigneoli. Mr. Vigneoli, who didn't inspire me sufficiently to want to make a presentation about him, but I changed my mind. And I will try to explain why I changed my mind. Mainly because of that picture I saw of him with 4 pairs of glasses, one on his head, one in front of his eyes, one around his neck suspended, and there was another one also in the same position. I like this, but I don't like this kind of picture with him. This, in my opinion, fake smile turns me off completely. I don't like the man that I see in this picture, but I saw other pictures with him that I like. But when he smiles like this, I hate it. And when I contemplate the building on the lower left corner, I hate it too. And we are going to arrive at detail. I will talk about these 3 buildings and a few others. But what he did in his early years in South America, I like very much. And I will show a few images of his very early work in Argentina. He was born in Uruguay, but he was trained as an architect in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. And he built a lot there together with other architects. This one is a later work, and it should not have been here, but that's how I started. It's a museum, Fort Abad Museum, also in Buenos Aires, but I think it's a later work. I don't know. I mean, it's a good building, but what moves him most about about his beginnings in Buenos Aires are actually housing complexes, and in a way, it's interesting to compare what he did with what Ginzburg did. This is a private house, his own house, the Vigneoli house. I don't know if it's in Buenos Aires, but it is in Argentina, and I think it's very interesting. And it has a freshness, a vision. I like it. It's cultural, it's simple, it's constructivist. I think Mr. Ginzburg would have liked it too if he saw it. That was built, half a century later for him and his wife. And I don't know if they have kids, but now he has a son, I know. But I like this building, it's from the 70s, I think, or 60s. But it has a genuineness, a freshness. Too bad I couldn't find too many pictures with it. I would have liked to see also the plans, but I couldn't find them. But the building, he was influenced by the metabolist movement in Japan. And that was a good influence, I would say. Because the metabolists they were very different from the Russians at the beginning of the 20th century. But there was that concern with vitality, with truthfulness, with togetherness, with biology, with the mechanisms of life that are not hidden by petit bourgeois pathetical concerns and so on. And this building also shows, yes, it shows a certain opulence, but it's adventurous. It's with that bridge, that horizontal part between two towers. It's a unique building. Even this scene from this corner, the only touch of sweetness, so to speak, is this curved canopy, but it becomes whimsical. Otherwise, you wouldn't even say that this is a house. I mean, look at this horizontal part of the building and how tall this one is, and it has two parts, as you saw. Anyway. But now we arrive at, in my opinion, a beautiful example of social architecture, truly a social condenser, like we saw in the project in Soviet Union done by Ginzburg. It was called Conjunto, Rioja, and there were several people who worked on it. Rafael Vinoly is here, but I don't know to what extent he was the author of this. He was one of the authors. So I have this reservation. It might be that other people in this group, because he was very young, had a greater input. I don't know. But I am glad to show this work because it shows again an architecture that has social concerns, which is fresh, which is sculptural, and which is very interesting. So 1973. So 50 years after Ginzburg, in Buenos Aires, this Rioja housing complex, designed by whatever those letters mean, the building was based on a 1960s Japanese design approach called metabolism. Yes, I mentioned that, metabolists that made extensive use of organic growth patterns and of tree imagery, starting from a core construction capable of branching and expanding over time in a Buddhist tradition. I never thought of actually the relationship between Buddhism and metabolism, but maybe it's possible. Adopting the organic imagery without the Buddhist overtones, the architects executed a number of metabolist designs. That is in this project in which you are going to see in Buenos Aires. The Rioja housing complex was the first. The site was developed by the Bank of the City of Buenos Aires, a subsidized housing for 440 employee families. It incorporated commercial space and community areas. You see the same kind of cross-fertilization that we witness in the building by Ginzburg. It incorporated commercial space and community areas as well as private residences, giving rise to a solution that is a hybrid of two building types, the tower and the slab. The two elements, just like in his own house, as we saw, the two elements are completely integrated within a cluster of 7 18-story units linked by 10 bridges, affording both circulation and residential areas. And it's quite spectacular, and it is. I think it's if this was done today, I would salute it as an event. Right? It was done 50 years ago. You are going to see better pictures. You know, I'm absolutely sure the Russian constructivists would have loved this work in Buenos Aires, done half a century later on a different continent. These were not rich people. There were subsidized housing units for the employees of this bank. They were, you know, regular people, so to speak. But the building has an ethos, has even an eros, I would say. It's alive. And unfortunately, after Vigneoli moved to the United States, in my opinion, he lost something. He lost the joyous reality in a way. I mean, Argentina had many problems and continues to have. But what I see here in terms of architecture is real life. And there is a vivacity, which I admire. You know, maybe they were not the most expensive buildings in the world, but that was actually a quality, not a deficiency. Really a very nice complex of apartment buildings, in my opinion. Because what I see here, I see a genuine and fresh interest in communality. So this was not just a sum of little individual units. This complex of buildings was meant to act as a catalyst for multiplicity in unity. And whenever that happens, when you have multiplicity in unity, something positive happens in architecture. 1970s, Rafael Vinoly was part of the team that designed this, and I think they were inspired. And for me, they are still inspiring. And I think we should build again in this way, somehow, you know, apartment buildings that connect horizontally, vertically, that there is this, you know, spatial, even drama at times, because life needs, I think, you know, this kind of vivacity. And it was not an exasperated vivacity, you know, like, for example, deconstructivism sometimes displays. Here, the apartments are also, you know, rectangular, but they are open. They are, I mean, I can tell they are buildings without fear. This is how I would describe them. You know, and I truly think the Russian constructivists, those pioneers, would have loved this building or these buildings. All things are interconnected. There is an articulation here, volumes of parts of buildings, and you can tell there is the individual window, there is the individual apartment, but there is also the collectiveness. That's what I mean by multiplicity in unity. Good work. Now the Bank of the City of Buenos Aires I couldn't find, he built several banks there too, and I imagine with the same group of people, he didn't work alone. Um, these buildings are also good, but he was still young. He left Argentina and went to the United States, and there, almost miraculously, he must have been very well connected. He got very important commissions very quickly. But before we arrive at them, I want to show you, because I came across an interesting text. Apparently, this man is also very knowledgeable about music, about the piano player, and he loves pianos. And in fact, he has a collection of great pianos. But let's look first at his musical refuge, which is a structure, building he built for himself and his wife, where music is performed. And I have this website opened, and I can read something, because it's kind of a nice article about this other side of Raphael Vignoli, his deep involvement with the piano and actually with music. So this is in his house. I don't know, architecturally, I'm not thrilled by what I see here, but from the outside, I guess it's okay. What can we say? It's okay. He's able to bring a public dimension to a private building. It is private. It's his own campus, so to speak. But I don't know. I mean, here there is a level of publicness, so to speak, but it's okay. Maybe now is the time to read a little bit about this interesting side of Raphael Vignoli, and that is his involvement with music. Just a second. I don't know why this is automatically showing up. Okay, it's here. So I will read a little bit from this, the New York, The Sun, Raphael Vignoli's Musical Refuge. It was published in 2008. 3 in the city, 2 on Long Island, 1 in London, 1 in South America, 1 in Miami, another lent to his son, maybe 1 in Los Angeles. He's about to bump up the tally with a Fazioli from Venice. Will it go into the new office he's about to set up in Dubai? So this is what Vignoli said. It's embarrassing. This becomes a fanaticism. Mr. Vigneoli said recently at his Tribeca headquarters, which are furnished with not 1, but 2 Steinway concert grands in Yanging. So in his own architecture offices, he has 2 big concert Steinway pianos. One of these belongs to Mitsuko Uchida, bought for the Marlboro Festival, he said. I keep it for her. She'll probably show up tomorrow to practice. Sometimes we play together. Can you believe it? I mean, this man is friends with some of the best piano players in the world, and they even play together. This was 2 days before Ms. Uchida's Carnegie recital. In the past, Rostropovich visited him. Martha Argerich, I'm not familiar with some of their names, unfortunately, and I might not pronounce them very well, is a regular when she doesn't cancel. Maurizio Polini, however, always travels with his own piano, so the 2 meet elsewhere. The Uruguay-born Mr. Vignoli is no mere collector. He is a bona fide musician who once contemplated a career as a pianist. He attended a music conservatory before switching fields and knows how to finger those 88 ivories. Amazingly, I should confess that I still do consider sitting down to work out something as it deserves to work out, he said. Scores by Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin, and Schumann clutter his pianos. It's hard to believe that someone as globally busy as Mr. Vignoli, with 250 employees to manage around the world, still has time for practice in addition to attending concerts at Carnegie Hall. I spend more time there than here, he said. It's really a spectacular place. So he said that he spends more time at concerts at Carnegie Hall than in his own office. Although he is among the world's most knowledgeable architects in music, he is not a one to pay lip service to often recited similarities between the two disciplines. For him, architecture is not frozen music. There is no piece of music that could relate to anything else but itself and its world, he asserted. It is truly an independent. The one thing coplanar with music is the compositional aspect, the fact that you are composing something. Architecture is essentially a score, and what happens with it depends on the people who play it, enjoy it, use it, or hate it. That said, his design for whatever, Verizon Hall, the Philadelphia Orchestra Home, resemble the curvaceous interior of a big string. Anyway, this article is by a journalist. Mr. Vignoli's own performance hall is his small private theater that you just saw, a charming piano pavilion he designed and built 8 years ago on his 5-acre property in Watermill, Long Island. It's better than a swimming pool, better than a tennis court. The charming retreat on Mill Pond, which he shares with his Argentinian wife Diana, features a big white house whose main section dates from 1790. There is a little tea house near the lake and the swimming pool. Anyway, instead of a tennis court, there is this 2,500 square foot freestanding wooden and glass structure situated on a small slope with a wrap-around patio. Visible through the windows are a gorgeous Hamburg Steinway on a small proscenium in front of which are 24 seats. And it's rare that an architect is his own client. He built it for himself, but he said it's the most horrible thing you could ever wish. He said, it's very difficult to understand. As tiny as this is, it takes exactly the same amount of work as doing the Tokyo International Forum. And we are going to see that important building by him, one of his most famous buildings. There is no distinction between the levels of responsibility and intricacy. The one thing that I chose to do, which is usually something you cannot do, is to forget the budget. To put it another way, it was 4 times over budget. I should have fired myself. But the important thing to remember here is what he said, and I do think is important. It doesn't matter. You make the hut, Le Cabanon by Le Corbusier, which is 16 square meters, or l'unité d'habitation, or you make this music pavilion, which you saw, it's a small building, or the Tokyo International Forum, which is huge. The level of responsibility is the same. And I totally agree with Vigneoli. But this little theater is the icing on the cake of Mr. Vignoli's passion. Daniel Barenboim has stayed in the house and played there. Unlike Mr. Barenboim, Mr. Vignoli is too shy to perform in public, in spite of a recent invitation to play at Royal Albert Hall in London. This is not a little thing. I mean, this architect was invited to play the piano at the Royal Albert Hall in London. He said, battling the mysteries of performance is a lifelong problem for most of us. He said he was astounded when legendary piano virtuoso Alfred Brendel told him before retiring several years ago that he was going to try to understand Mozart. That someone at such a level of accomplishment still felt he had to come to terms with that music boggles the mind, but beautifully demonstrates the bottomless depths music presents to a serious, probing musician. Mr. Vignoli would like to delve deeper into his Mozart too. That's why he's taken up piano lessons again at age 33. Can you believe it? This extremely busy architect at 63 was taking piano lessons. You want to play Mozart? He said, quoting his teacher. This is like walking naked on Fifth Avenue, so you have to be in good shape because you can't hide anything. He's also learning Chopin's G minor ballet, Beethoven, Schoenberg, and Schumann's. Anyway, one of the most difficult. Mr. Vignoli is no show-off. Though a mean sight reader, he comprehends that musical performance not only requires understanding and technique, but an ability to project a compelling interpretation in front of an audience, usually by memory. Greatness is so rare and so fundamental in music, he said. That's the reason I don't play, because you really don't need, really need to be at the level of Mitsuko. He laughed. Mitsuko told me once that she's not a great pianist, but a great piano chooser, and I'm looking forward for her to choose one for me. So there might yet be another piano to add to the collection. I never thought this was a hobby, Mr. Vigneoli said. It's not an entertainment. It's a rare combination of pleasure and suffering. So sorry for going through the suffering of hearing all this text. And now we continue. But I do think it's important to admire someone who, besides running a very successful architectural practice, is deeply connected with another art, and that is music. I do admire him for this. And the building is not so bad. I would give him, if I'm allowed to evaluate the building in terms of a grade, something in between an 8 and a 9. I think a problem might be here. Otherwise, the box itself has a certain dignity. And here he is with his wife and with a cook. Obviously, these are very rich people, and it's enough to look at the vegetarian dish to understand that they are doing very well. And he seems to have an interesting wife, and it's always said that behind a very successful man, there is always a strong woman, and maybe she is. Now, the Tokyo Forum, this was a building that he built as a result of a competition he won many years ago. Maybe it was, kind of like 40 years ago. So he was young, 30 something, and this launched him in a big way in the field of architecture. It's a good building. It's this one here. It's an international building. I mean, it's an ample building. Actually, the whole of it is here. It's all of it. All of it was done by him. I don't know. I mean, it's good, and you'll see some very convincing pictures of this large institutional building in a a demanding city like Tokyo. Some parts perhaps are just like his music pavilion, a little bit too predictably. I mean, you kind of expect a certain architecture to, but he's not making mistakes here. He made mistakes in some other buildings, and we are going to see one of them. The interior is more interesting because of these diagonals, which create a dynamic, atmosphere. So we see a little bit of the relation of the aesthetics and the spatial configurations that were already present in that housing complex in Buenos Aires, except that here the architecture in Tokyo is a little more spoiled, or maybe more than just a little bit. It's a different program also. My heart is still closer to that project in Buenos Aires. I mean, I see qualities here clearly, but it's a corporate architecture, but it has a concern with togetherness, with collectiveness. You see these people walking, taking the stair, taking the elevator. It was before the pandemic, but I imagine it's the same way now in Tokyo. Maybe the density of people even higher. And the rooms, the gathering rooms are very well designed in a simple but dignified way. And maybe there is something Japanese here somehow that he was able to express, although he is not Japanese. But yes, these are dignified spaces, and we have to acknowledge the nobility of the spaces he created, the palette, the chromatic palette. It's good architecture. It is. And it's remarkable that the young man, the Vigneoli, has talent. Unfortunately, we'll see some things which are questionable, but here, what I see here, I agree with, and I applaud. And obviously, he loves music. I mean, even here, it's affection towards music. Otherwise, some of these big rooms are, kind of predictable. What can you do after all? But there are all kinds of rooms, like even this one is interesting. I don't know what its function is. Maybe I don't know, but it is good. It is good architecture. Maybe here is a large, model map of Tokyo. I don't know what it is. I mean, it's a huge room dedicated to this, I guess. You can imagine winning such a competition. I mean, afterwards he got all the commissions he wanted, and plus, you can imagine the investment in this building, and proportionately what he got, in terms of financial rewards. So that's what I keep saying to the students and young architects and older architects, and even myself: do competitions. If you love architecture, do competitions. If you don't do them, you don't win for sure. If you do them, you might lose. But if you don't do them, you lose for sure because you don't participate. This is the way to go for a young architect. This is the way to go, and there are so many competitions, and they are open to everybody. Most of them, not all of them, but most of them, they are open. I like this, the forest of columns, if I can call them so. Look at them here. They are exquisitely designed and exquisitely built. It's Japan after all. And yes, he is good here. He is good in this project. It's not this project or this building that made me think twice about talking about him. Now, with this glass canopy, I don't know. It's okay. It's okay. But anyway. Now, we arrive at a tower he built recently, or rather recently, that provokes some controversy, but I think aesthetically is very, very well done. It's he used the word dignified building or having dignity, and I think he does. And it's not so easy because it was a speculative building, by the real estate manipulations of the market to generate a lot of income. And I understood it was very, very successful. Is this building here? The tallest building in the Northern Hemisphere for housing. It's an apartment building. There were other buildings springing upwards in Manhattan, slenderer and slenderer. This one I admire because I think it's better than other buildings by even more famous architects like Herzog and de Meuron and even Bjarke Ingels. This one has indeed dignity. It's simple. Of course, the apartments are immensely expensive. I mean, I don't know, but tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars an apartment there. But talking about architecture, it's good architecture. Yes, such skyscrapers are under attack because many people think that they throw an unacceptable shadow over the city and over Central Park. But he protested. He said, wait a minute, yes, it's tall, but it's slender. So yes, the shadow is long, but it's not very voluminous because the building is narrow. And he has a point. But in terms of architecture, I think it's very well done, and you can find on YouTube a whole lecture that he gave on this building, where he explains many issues relating to it. It's a good building. Well, in a way, he was honest when he said that actually his role was not big in this project, because most of the things that we look at now were derived from the the program and the engineering that was very important in such a slender and tall building. It has only one kind of window, the same dimension. And I understood it was built, that window, in China somewhere by a certain company. Of course, these windows do not open. So, the whole building is heavily air conditioned. Now, I don't know. I mean, I look at this apartment, clearly, I cannot breathe. I cannot step on this giant carpet. The rooms are very tall. I understood they are 3 meters, well, in translating from feet, about 3.5 meters, the height. And all the windows are square, the same dimensions. And I guess it's fine, but again, this is not for everybody. This is a luxury building. He himself used the word luxury all the time. This apartment and this building, as opposed to what Ginzburg did, and as opposed to what he himself did in Buenos Aires, represents a different world. This is the world of financial gods in general, of people with immense amounts of money. Yes, this is not truly a social condenser. No, as opposed to the building and buildings by Ginzburg, this is a building that proclaims a huge distance between a certain category of people and other people. And I think it's a problem here. Of course, there were always, differences, in Palladio's time as well, and in any society. But somehow capitalism exacerbates these differences to levels that are alarming, actually. Well, it's nice, no? I mean, but in a way too nice. I don't know. I mean, look at this, what is this? Harvard pool, it's I don't know. I find it a little bit pretentious. I mean, I admire the aesthetics, the simplicity, the dignity, but there is some falseness here, because I wonder, how do you feel when you enter this building, which is a privileged building? It gives you privileges that most people do not have. So how much dignity is in that? I mean, in what way are you entitled to be so different from the majority of people? I don't think such an entitlement should be accepted, but it is. I mean, look at this, it's the typical health club within the building, and yes, the light is like in a Vermeer painting, but essentially the activity on these machineries is frivolous, it's for people who don't do anything the whole day. So in order to still have their limbs function, they go to the health club and run their machineries instead of actually running to, I don't know, to work, or running to a store to buy something, or running to I don't know where. And the swimming pool, as a sacred space. It's not a sacred space. I'm sorry. I mean, let's... we just learned that Bill Gates and his wife are divorcing. So the reality of divorce, which is heavy and dark and complicated and painful. All these pictures, all these buildings, they don't tell anything about the complexities of life. In that building in Buenos Aires that he was part of the team that they built, there I saw somehow the dualities of life. You know, there was togetherness, there was multiplicity, there was individualism, but there was also the communality. But I also saw something telling something about real life. This is not real life. You know, it's this incredible swimming pool. In fact, so clean the water that you can't even enter it. There is no one around. The light, again, it's divine. The marble here is divine. You know, everything is divine, but human life is not divine. And somehow, in this sense, the building is not quite real. Yes, it's nice. I mean, yes, I like it. I has some kind of a almost neoclassical or even classical regularity and serenity. But look at the cars in front of the building. I mean, you know, I don't know. And even this part in the corner, you know, it's yes, it's very well crafted. It's true, but again, there are restrictions. You know, yeah, this is not like the building in Buenos Aires that in a way welcomed everybody. This thing is telling you through its very appearance that this is not for you. That is, if you are, you know, the man on the street. It's and as architecture is not very innovative. I mean, yes, it's greatly crafted, but essentially it's a box. You know, and the building itself is here, the tall tower. But it does look nice. I mean, look, yes, you know, I throw with stones at capitalism. This was born within and by capitalism, but I lived here many years in New York, so I know a little bit about this city. I know what it means to be in this city. I love New York. I love Central Park. I probably would have loved this building if I saw it, and I love it in pictures. But I also know the mechanisms that function in this city. You know, it's a city where money is very, very important, and fortunately, the city has an exuberance which is remarkable, and this exuberance is because of it is a melting point, a melting pot between so many people. You know, various cultures, various ages, various incomes. There is anyone here. But not anyone can enter this building or any of these buildings here. So I love New York City, and I like this tower by Vigneoli. Although the people who complain about its shadow might have some reasons too, but I wouldn't. I like its courageous verticality. It's okay. This is, in my opinion, this is a good building by Raphael Vinoly, although a student told me yesterday that apparently there are troubles with it, that there are floodings here. I don't know why that happened. I don't think it's the responsibility of the architect that, but I also read by Vigneoli, he himself complained for some reason about the windows. And he even said that within the apartments, the bathrooms were not placed kind of correctly in the anatomy of the apartment. I don't know. Seen from the outside, the building, I think, is one of the better skyscrapers built in the last years in Manhattan. Now we arrive at this, and here I'm beginning to criticize Vigneoli. He builds a lot. And if you go to his website, you will realize that. But unfortunately, something was lost. When he left Buenos Aires, I think he left a part of his soul there. I think he has an artistic temperament. He loves music. He loves Beethoven, Chopin, and so on. But then he builds this highly questionable, huge building in Las Vegas. Las Vegas is the city of losing not just money, but losing your own in a way around dignity, because it's the place of the casinos, it's the place of gambling. This is what Las Vegas is. So whatever Venturi might say that we can learn from Las Vegas, in my opinion, is that we can't. You can't learn much from a city of casinos. What can you learn? To lose yourself in that way? And look what he built. Now this is, I situate this building in opposition to the complex of buildings in housing, subsidized housing in Buenos Aires. This is a banal commercial structure, yes, very well executed, but it is a money-making machine without any nobility. I am very sorry, and actually, if you were here, Mr. Vigneoli, I would have told you. It doesn't bring anything to your portfolio in good terms, such a building. And he built others like this. You know, this is just selling your soul for money. That's what it is. Even in terms of architecture, it's not good. It's banal. It's a banal building, that it is a little bit curved. And look at this, all these buildings are actually machineries to invite people to gamble and gamble and gamble, like in The Gambler by Dostoevsky, where you lose your soul and you lose your money, exactly in this order. And what is to learn here? I mean, look at these mammoth towers, you know, what do they tell? And then we complain about sustainability, the climate change, and so on. Well, you know, these are abuses. You know, there is nothing glorious here about this architecture, if I am to call it architecture, and I don't. You know, what is so glorious about a building which houses gamblers who came in despair to give some meaning to their lives in order to play roulette or whatever? I played myself once roulette, the first one and the last time in my life, and I lost everything I had. Maybe that's why I have this intense aversion towards casinos. You know, it is legalized theft. That's what it is. That's why the casinos can build huge buildings, because the chance of winning or losing is not 50-50. The casinos have a higher chance to make you lose than you have to win. And so it's not a fair thing at all. It's based on theft. Las Vegas is built on theft, just as Atlantic City was built on theft. And too bad that the former president of the United States was very involved with this theft. But then we shouldn't be so surprised, since his grandfather was running brothels. So there. Well, you know, what is the drama of these chandeliers? In fact, he is obsessed by chandeliers. He mentions them in some interviews with him, you know, but he uses them himself. And here are, you know, the influences of the deconstruction somehow. Look at these nervous curves on the pavement, and then, you know, the so-called sculpturalness of the chandeliers or these lamps or whatever they are. It's all fake, really. This is, I mean, I have no respect for the architect who did this. I'm sorry, I don't. I have the respect for the one who worked in Buenos Aires, for the music lover. I have respect for the one even who did the Tokyo Forum, who did the tower at 432, the Park Avenue, that tall tower we just saw, but not for this. Look at this conference room, you know. You would say that the gods on Mount Olympus gather around this huge table. Vdara, hotel and spa. This is a money-making machine, and it does not belong to culture. As Alvar Aalto said, architecture belongs to culture, not to civilization. Well, this one belongs neither to culture nor to civilization. It belongs only to the financial mechanisms that make these people think that they are alive if they make more and more and more money. It's not so. And the architect who loves Beethoven and Chopin should have known better, but he didn't. And look at this bed, room, and the bed and the room and the bedroom and the bed. I mean, come on, it's pathetic, really. I could never sleep in this bed. You know, it's embarrassingly huge and comfortable. And I mean, no, it's. I would have terrible nightmares on this piece of furniture. It's terrible. It's really terrible. As terrible as the so-called artwork on this wall, and everything in this room shows, actually bad taste. Just compare with the interior of Donald Judd, which was sophisticated and, interesting, and you enter the room through the large window with a cross on it. But here, it's commerce and the commerce again, and probably the cost of this hotel room is $500 a night, if not more. I don't know about these things. And look here again, another platitude above another platitude. What are these people supposed to do here? To lay like this dead on these things, like Philip Johnson said, if I can build another skyscraper, why should I lay on the beach in a chaise-longue? Or it's really running away from life. I mean, to me, this is non-architecture. What he did or contributed to in Buenos Aires was architecture, because he was serving life, not entertainment. Whatever he said about collecting the pianos, that is not about entertainment, but this building in Las Vegas is certainly about that, gambling and having fun in the sunlight. I hate it. Now, a building which is even more alarmingly showing that Mr. Vigneoli should listen more to the very music that he claims he loves. Because if you listen to the Autumn Sonata or who knows, by one of those great composers he mentions, how could you build something like this in London? You'll see. The Raphael Vigneoli's 20, this is the address of the building, Fench Church Street, which is also called the Walkie Talkie, wins the 2015 Carbuncle Cup. The London building blamed for melting a Jag, that is a Jaguar, a car, was named the worst building in the United Kingdom. And it is. And not because it melted a Jaguar car. And you know why it melted it? Because the facade is curved, and it's curved, I don't know how to explain, it's the reflection of the sunlight went directly into a car and it was melted. And I read other alarming and alarmed opinions that people are blown away by the wind, which hitting the building turns them into the pedestrians and almost kills them. It is very dangerous. So this building, well, I'm not judging it from this point of view because I don't know. Maybe they didn't know themselves that this would be the consequences. But aesthetically, it's horrible. Look at this here. This was built by Vigneoli. I mean, if this is not a nut in the wall, I don't know what it is. I mean, how could it be that a sophisticated designer with an immense love for piano and piano music could build something like this in London? I also wonder what was in the minds and eyes of those officials in London who approved the project. And yes, the wind hits this facade, and then because it is curved towards, inclined, sloping towards the street, it is directed towards the street, and yes, it almost kills. It killed the car, and it could kill the people. This is the building. In my opinion, it's a contrived building. It's why did he make it bigger at the top? And I think those people who voted for it to be the worst building in the United Kingdom were correct. I didn't know about that, but when I saw it, I mean, there are some problems with the building by Foster as well, but not as much as like in the building by Vigneoli. Look at this. I think it's aggressive, and because this building seems to say, I am overlooking you poor people on the street. It's a building with a. He himself recognized that they made a lot of mistakes with this building. But who are they? It's him. He is the owner of the firm. He is the one who takes the decisions. I think he changed. And it is known that power absolutely corrupts. And the man had an immense success, some of it justified. But I do think it is an involution from what he did in Buenos Aires and what he does now. Although there are here and there other interesting buildings, like he did one for the University of Chicago, very close to the Prairie House, to the Prairie House by Frank Lloyd Wright, which is good. It's not perfect, but it's good. But this one, it is indeed a mistake, and he recognized it himself, and it's too bad it was built. Not because it melted down a car, maybe an expensive car, not because of that. And maybe not even because, the wind is reflected back on people on the street with dangerous intensities. He didn't know about this, or the studies they made were not sufficiently or correctly done. Otherwise, what can we say? It's commercial architecture done with a certain level of refinement, but huge spaces, a lot of glass, a lot of electricity used for nothing, I mean, it's daylight here, no? Why is it necessary to have so much electricity still being used? And then we complain that the icebergs are melting. But here, look at this gentleman, and look at the machineries on his desk. This monitor is many people think today that we live in a post-anthropocentric time, that it's the time when the human being is the measure of all things is gone. But not for Vigneoli and not for this gentleman. I have nothing against him. I don't know him. But it's something about this that disturbs me, I mean, there is so much pollution, so many problems in the world. And look at this, he's like Zeus here on Mount Olympus. And the chair itself, it's an arrogant display of levels of self-confidence, which I'm tempted to oppose. So, of course, there was no interest or not enough interest in how the wind blows. Who cares about the wind, right? We care about the glorification of a certain exotic shape that the building might have. Look at these large pieces of glass. Can you imagine how much energy is being used in order to control the temperature inside this probably vast space? No, we don't think about this. And yes, of course, the people are looking down on London, on the great city, and maybe feel good. But at the bottom, other people complain that the wind blows them away. And one even complained that was almost killed. I am judging aesthetically, but not only aesthetically, ethically too. Look at this, I mean, glass everywhere, glass. It's hard for me to believe that a proliferation of such buildings in the world will add our many issues, discrepancies between the rich and the poor, the melting of the icebergs, the rising levels of the seas, the pollution, No, they won't, and we still don't stop. And it doesn't matter, we listen to Chopin or Beethoven or Mozart, we are still kind of manipulated by our own inability to avoid the arrogance of the anthropos. I really find this building very questionable. First, for me, aesthetically, I think it's an aberration. Look at this. Anyway, he built it, and London encouraged its building. And here he is, eternally laughing. Although when he doesn't laugh, I like him. And what I do like about him is that he kept or became very young. I mean, he really looks very young at 70. He's 77 years old, extremely young. And I like the fact that even here, he has 2 pairs of eyeglasses. But in other pictures, I saw him with 4. I don't know why he would use 4, because his needs remain the same. No, I mean, at the most you need 2, one for long distance, one for short distance. I like this about him, but I also have some questions which I already verbalized about. And here it is. The who knows, because we become what we hate. Maybe in a few years, if I'm still alive, I might turn to love it. Who knows? I hope not. And it's a coincidence. The people of England think this is the worst building built recently or in a certain year in the United Kingdom. Anyway, that's it. So I try to pay homage to Raphael Vignoli as well, and with this I end.